counterproductive laws that should never have been on the books in the first place, but never mind that. We'll have a chance to get them off there, starting with the Patriot Act. Although, who knows, by then the United States federal government may well have ceased to exist, so things like the Patriot Act or the U.S. Constitution or anything else that Washington, D.C. has passed would probably be an academic point if that government ceased to exist. But not just in what would then be being referred to as the former United States in the same way we speak of a former Soviet Union. The resultant countries from it would be it a U.S. breakup, the countries that resulted from the breakups of the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. I'm sure by then there'll be a past tense European Union. Be it whatever nation it is on this planet, to go about the business of looking at its laws and saying, what laws do we really need here? These are the ones we need. The ones that aren't on this list, consider them repealed right now. Get some judges on them for their benches that care about things like this pesky little thing from the point of view of a David Rockefeller or a Nathan Rothschild or an Evelyn Rothschild. They could say to themselves, you know, let's bring some humanity to bear on our justice system, as opposed to catering to the global elite. You know, that way we can get some judges on the benches with some common sense. And
sounds
obviously,
good.
Yeah, and obviously shred the contracts for prison privatization, and if the be ready for it for companies like Correctional Corporation of America or Wackenhut to say, well, we demand compensation for all the years we ran your prisons. I would be more than happy to say to the corporate executives of the companies, like, here's the compensation you're going to get. You're going to get your last
Could you hold
paycheck.
that thought one moment? I'm going to just pull in Ethan Indigo Smith, and he's going to add to our conversation.
Contracts made on pretense.
Ethan, are you there?
Oh, now I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay. Anyway, we now have Ethan, who's a brilliant. Well, he's been on you before with us.
Exactly.
So say that last sentence about the prison.
As I said, with the global elite gone, is what I'm trying to say. Then obviously the prison privatization contracts would be shredded, and when the corporate executives of the corporations that ran the prisons say, well, we want our compensation now that those prisons have been privatized, and the privatized prisons have been taken back by the governments. We want our compensation. We can say to them, here's your compensation. You take your final paycheck and go, and we're going to dissolve your company. No longer is there a Correctional Corporation of America. No longer is there a Wackenhut or any of these other companies that got in that game. And beyond your final paychecks, the only other compensation you're getting is you're not going to end up in the prisons that have now been taken back under the control of the government. How does that sound for a nice severance package?
Sounds great.
No,
how did we get to this privatization of prisons to begin with? I mean, when I was a child...
I'll tell you exactly how it was done. Sasha. The first George Bush, when he was still hiding behind the front man of Ronald Reagan, started it. It was George Herbert Walker Bush was still the first George Bush was still vice president of the United States, and Ronald Reagan was really just his front man and yes man. Some of his buddies had started the Correctional Corporation of America. In fact, some of the same corporate executives that were behind Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Kentucky Fried Chicken is behind this. Shame on Colonel Stanton.
Some of the same corporate executives that were behind them, and also the wife of a former politician, Lamar Alexander. I can't for the life of me remember her name.
But then this has to Congress or something, and you would think that's huge. That we're gonna, Congress? I mean, who approved of this? I mean, this Bush...
It was Ronald Reagan in name. In name only, Ronald Reagan approved of it. He did so. Basically, George Herbert Walker Bush slapped executive orders down on his desk that said, sign here. And he didn't dare.
So this was an executive order thing. It wasn't an act. It wasn't a law that was passed in Congress. It was just some kind of a presidential action, you're saying?
They bypassed Congress. And then the National Director of the Immigration and Naturalization Service also was in on the contract with the Correctional Corporation of America. They built a processing center for illegal aliens in Houston, Texas. That was the first contract landed by the Correctional Corporation of America. And they dressed it up as a huge success. Oh, look at how many Mexican farm laborers and Mexican day laborers we ran out of Texas to a privately run slammer in Houston.
Well, meanwhile, the crop are too high and mighty to go harvest fruit or vegetables.
Well,
they won't do.
There you go. So obviously some big money went into this. Now, I can tell you right now the global elite was behind the foundation of the Correctional Corporation of America, and I'll tell you why. Think about it a minute. What sort of number of figures, dollar figure, do you think went in to the establishment of a private prison operating company?
I don't know. Tell me.
Do you think you could go anywhere near a startup of a business like that for anything less than $10 million?
Well, did they build their own prisons, or did they just take over the existing system?
They did a bit of both. Sometimes they built one, sometimes they took over an existing one. So they did a bit of both, Janet.
Ethan, what do you think of all this?
Well, it's pretty interesting that right around the same time they escalated or initiated private prison system in this country, they started the drug war, quote unquote.
Thank you.
And what does that do? Talk about cementing the oligarchy. It not only creates the business but feeds it.
Right.
There you go. Well, anyway, Janet and Sasha, I got to say one thing before I forget. When you mentioned about fascism earlier on in the program, here is the point at which one could say fascism first arrived in America. Fascism is a merger of corporate and government powers. The means of production remain nominally in private hands, but they're basically under control of government. But the owners of the means of production have so cultivated such deep inroads into the run of government that basically government and the private sector corporations all but become one and the same. Often it's only a nominal or in name-only separation between government and the private corporations. And oftentimes the various government officials simultaneously hold seats on the boards of directors of companies they're supposed to be regulating or keeping in line. Talk about a conflict of interest, am I not correct?
That's what it is.
Yeah. And
so that's how fascism first arrived in America. Fascism first arrived in America when George Herbert Walker Bush instructed Ronald Reagan to approve privatization of prisons.
Well,
and that's
if you look
really
at
what globalization is. Globalization is basically fascism under another name. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying our police are with
military
equipment. But go ahead, Ethan.
I was going to say, it's interesting how most people in the United States are quick to point out that church and state should be separate. But we never get into corporate and state being linked at the hip. And this is where we lose our liberty. And actually the United States, before it was such a thing, when it was just these colonies, the whole revolution was about anti-oligarchy, and it was the Company John, the British East India Company, that was the king's. The Dutch had their own too, the Dutch East India Company, but these corporate institutions that were basically imbued with the divine right of kings. And now, instead of the divine right of kings, we have the divine right of corporations. For sure, fascism, directly.
Exactly. They have so taken over.
If you look at what a corporation is, it's a presumably perpetual group. The current people who are running may go and not be persecuted. A corporation commit heinous crimes, and the real human perpetrators never get punished.
Very true. Very true. The only time you'll ever hear of some of the perpetrators ever really being punished is when it was a corporation that was not operating under the protection of the planetary oligarchy. Charlie Keating could well attest to that. I'm sure you heard back in the late 80s and early 90s how bad a man Charlie Keating supposedly was.
He was a patsy.
You look at the things he did, and they were nothing compared to the monkey shines of Wall Street that led up to the 2008 financial disaster. What was the difference between Charlie Keating and those people on Wall Street? One was operating under protection, and the other wasn't. That's the only difference. And really, when it comes down to it, Charlie Keating was rather honest by comparison. And when they took him down, I can tell you, I was there in Phoenix, Arizona, when they took Charlie Keating down. And it so put the kibosh on Phoenix, Arizona, and the surrounding cities' economy that finding work there was extraordinarily difficult, nearly impossible. And even when people did find any work, it was very low-paid service sector industry work. It just barely kept you afloat and nothing more. That was literally the devastating economic impact that Arizona and parts of California suffered when Charlie Keating got taken down. He had been so key to the economy there in Phoenix, and when he was taken out, it took a long time for them to recover from it. You look at the behavior of the Wall Street people, and none of them have suffered, and the economic damage that they inflicted was intentional and quite malicious at that. But anyway, in a few minutes, I will have to go ahead and withdraw from the conference because I do have a couple of other errands I have to run. Sorry, I'll have to cut out earlier. But
that's okay. We're almost at the end of your segment, and we can launch into. Just wanted to have a little bit of Ethan in on this conversation because it's a very conversation. We need to continue this. I'd like to get into more of how this works on the planet here and move into solutions. So you've got some background noise coming in there. Where are you?
It's the neighbor. I'm at home, and it's my neighbor.
Oh, it's a neighbor. I understand.
That's okay.
Okay. Well, let's all wrap some comments on the first half here, which we were talking about globalization, Nazism, and fascism here in the United States and around the planet. Do you want
well, it's interesting. I like to refer to it as oligarchical collectivism. And it's almost easier if you imagine you're a robot when saying it, but it really nails it on the head. And George Orwell came up with that term in his book 1984. And that's what we have is a series of oligarchies, a collection, a collectivism of oligarchies, oligarchical institutions that are
super oligarchy now.
Yeah, and so all of them don't necessarily coordinate, but they all have the same modus operandi, and so they end up doing things